In this video, we're going to take a look at image plane inside of ZBrush. This is a way that we can take one of our drawings and load it as an image plane inside of ZBrush so we can model directly over the top of this. So this is some of the final results of going through this process of setting this up. Let me change this back here and hit Control N to clear my canvas. So you can see I've modeled the head from the drawings that I've already done inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to take you through this process and show you exactly how I've set this up. So I'm going to start with a clean ZBrush document, and the first thing I'm going to do is change the setup of my UI just a little bit. So I'm going to click these arrows here and open up this slot off to the left. This will give me more options to play with when I have the texture palette open, so I can use my normal tools over here and the texture palette will be over here. I'm going to go ahead and click this little icon for the materials just to close that. I'm going to go to texture and then click this little icon here, and that should dock this palette right over to the left. Now what we're looking for is called image plane, so you can go ahead and click this open here, and you can see there's a reference views. You can click and open that, and you can see there's going to give us different options for front, back, right, left, top, bottom, custom 1 and 2, and we've got some model opacity. This cycles through the different views that you have. This will allow you to store the views that you have, and this will allow you to save or load a set of views and use that in a future session. So I'm going to just go and actually kick out a print screen so I can get the dimensions of my working space here. Alright, now that I've got my screen capture made by hitting print screen, I'm going to go over into Photoshop real quick, and I'm going to say File, New, and that's going to give me a new document. It's going to be the size of whatever my screen capture was. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and I'm going to hit Paste, Control V, and at that point I'm going to just focus particularly on this area right here. So I'm going to just zoom in to my document, and I'm just holding down spacebar and Control to zoom in, and then I'll put it on this marquee tool here. You can hit M for that, and I'm going to go ahead and just rough this out. I'm going to click and drag from this corner of my canvas and ZBrush to right here, and then after I have that I can zoom out. So I'm going to hold down spacebar, Control, and then add Alt to that, and now when I click, that's going to zoom out for me. So you can see I've made this selection right here, and I'm just going to go to Image and say Crop. So now that has filled my, or actually it's reduced my canvas size inside of Photoshop to this area that we have right here. So I can hit Control D and deselect. Now at this point I'm going to have to take the image that I've drawn inside of Photoshop, the front and side view, and place this in here, and this is going to let me know exactly how I can lay this out inside of ZBrush. So let me take a look here real quick. I have an image already pulled up for going through this process. So I've taken the front view and the side view and laid that out, and then I'll be able to use this inside of ZBrush to model off of and get the front view and the side view. So I went ahead and flattened that out and saved it as a JPEG, and at that point I'm going to be able to pull that into ZBrush. So we'll hop back over to ZBrush, and what you'll have to do is go into the texture palette area right here and just say Load Image. I have an image planes folder where I'm keeping my image, and it doesn't look like anything's in there. The reason for that is if you're on Windows, you might have to check this little drop down here, and you can change that from Photoshop a PSD. You could save it out as a Photoshop document if you want that's flattened, or you can use JPEG or a TIFF. So I'm going to put on JPEG, and at that point your image should show up as something that you can actually select and load. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Open, and it's going to automatically build it's basically a flat plane, and it's going to change the shader for you and fill that flat plane with a particular color. But you don't really need to be too concerned about what's going on behind the scenes. You just want to make sure that your image gets loaded in here. So now at this point I can start to add a model to the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Sphere 3D, and I'm going to, right off the bat, draw this thing out, and I'll hit T to go into edit mode. And I can change my shader to something like the red wax material. And you can see this is a 3D primitive from ZBrush, so it's got a set resolution to it. There's ways that you can go and change the resolution of this primitive object, but we're not too concerned about that. So let's turn this into a model that can actually be sculpted on. So if we click Make Polymesh 3D, if I click on that, it's going to make a new object, and it's going to be called PM3D underscore sphere 3D underscore 1. That's a mouthful. But basically just means that we now have a new object that we can actually sculpt on, and it's not in primitive mode anymore. So we can rename that right here in the subtool palette, and I'll just call this head. And right now you can see that here we are here. So I'm going to zoom in on the model and get it roughly in the right spot for the head. And right now it's kind of hard to see what's going on with this model in conjunction with the image that I drew. So I can take the model opacity and I can drop this down. And when I get it roughly put into place, then I can go ahead and store this view for the front view. Now if I click on left, you're not going to see anything here. The model is darker because of this model opacity. So if you ever load up ZBrush and you start to notice that your models are really dark after you've used image plane, always check this model opacity. It might be slightly turned down, so you can always put that all the way up to 100%. Just go ahead and check that out if you ever run into that issue. So make sure that in the texture palette that you have your image loaded and you're on left, and go ahead and say load image. And now you're going to be able to store a view for the left. So if I click on front, we've got a view, and click on left, we have a view. But obviously we want the scale from the front to match the left. And every time you click on this, it's going to put in this different zoom and push it away from the canvas. So how do you get them to be exactly the same size? Well, there's a tool inside a document, and under Zap Link Properties, you can store camera views within here. So I'm going to steal some of the functionality of this to help me out. So while I'm on the front view here, I'm going to go to Document and just click on Front, and that's going to store that view for me. Now when I click left, it's going to put me in this new mode in the image plane. And I'll go back to Document and just click on Front, and now I've got that front view back. So now I can just click and drag and rotate that to a left view, and I'm going to hold down Shift while I rotate to constrain my my view here. So now I can just hold down Alt and click and drag and move back. And if I hold down Shift while I do this, it actually constrains the motion here to make us move in a straight line. So I'm just going to push it right back to here. And now that I have the model in place, I can just say store a view, and it's going to overwrite the view that I have. So now I've got a front view and a left view that I can start working with. And I'm going to go ahead and put it on my move brush and tap X to turn on symmetry. And now I can start to push and pull this shape around to start to build up the shape of the head. And if you get things moved somehow and you're not too happy with what you just did, it's not a big deal, because you can just go right back and click back that front view, and I can go between this and the left view and start to really shape this head to match the drawings. Now I wanted to point out that if I have a front view and a side view, I usually go and pay more attention to what's going on in the front view to line things up. Because if you get a drawing from the front view and the side view, chances are that the proportions and everything that's been laid out actually working whenever you start to make this in 3D are pretty slim to none. You have to be really careful and really talented, I would say, to make a front view and a side view that actually really works 100% in 3D. So I could get things lined up from the front and I could get things lined up from the side, but as you start to look at this model in 3 dimensions, such as turning it here, you might have some issues to start to deal with. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and smooth some of this out. So I would focus more of my attention on making sure that it looks good from the front view, if you have a good front view image, and that should help you get likeness. And I would just use the left view to kind of guide you in figuring out the Z depth for something. Now here's something that might help you out. I'm going to put the model opacity up here real quick. So currently I can move this model all around in X, Y, and Z. But if I go to transform, and if I open up modifiers, I can actually change this to only move in the Z dimension. So I click on that and this opens everything up. So I can choose X and Z if I wanted, or just Z. I'm going to put it on just Z. And then now I can actually pull some of these features and they're only going to move forward or backward in Z space. So at this early stage of just kind of roughing things out, that can actually help you whenever you line things up with the front. You want to hold everything that you've made as far as lining things up in the front, and then you go to your left view and you can just start to move these things around just a little bit. I'm going to hit Control D to get a little more geometry, and I'm not really concerned about the quality of the model right now. The thing that I'm mainly concerned about is just getting some of this rough shape moved. And make sure that you go back into transform and put that back on XYZ so you can freely move with the move brush at that point. So I'm just going to work in this symmetrical mode, and at some point I'll actually break the symmetry after I've laid out some different features. So I'm going to tap 2 for my hotkeys, which is the damn standard brush, and I'll drop this model opacity down so I can start to see some of these features, and then I can just kind of quickly lay out where things like the eyes are going to be and where the nose would be, and roughly for the mouth. Maybe the chin. And I can go to the left view and I can start to see what I've actually made. I'll put it back on the move brush. Then at that point I can start to move these things around. Try to push this back more to where the eye actually sits. And try to get a rough idea of what this looks like in 3D. So you can see I've really pulled some of these features entirely too far. So I'll just push that back. Pull the bridge of the eyebrows here. If I go to the left view, another thing you can do is actually still paint with your mask. So I can paint a mask for the ear, holding down Control. If I hold down Control and Alt and draw, then I can subtract from that mask that we have here. Hit Control I to inverse, and I'll tap 4 for my hotkey for the move brush, and I'm just going to pull out the ear. rough out the shape for that, and then hold down Shift and smooth right in this area. Alright, now that we have this to where we can kind of roughly see where some of these shapes are and getting a little bit of the landmarks laid out, I'm going to add some eyes to this at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the subtool palette and say append right here, and I'm going to append the sphere 3D one, and yours might just say sphere 3D, but this is the remember that process we took the primitive and turned it into a make polymesh 3D. This should be a leftover piece from that. So at this point I can take the transpose tool and then click and drag and move this around. Now something to note, they've made it to where the transpose tools will actually snap from one object to another as you draw out. So if I click and drag out and I go to the open viewport here, it's actually snapping to that image plane that's way off in the distance. So in order to get around that, you can just hit Control N to clear your canvas at any point. And now if I click and drag out, you can see it's going to give me a line as I would expect and what I'm looking for. So now I can just put this on the scale and click and drag this down. If I want to get my view back, I can tap front here, and if that doesn't load, I can go to left and then maybe go to front at that point. So I'm going to put it back on scale and just scale this eye down a little bit and put it on the move, and then click right here in the middle to shift this around. And now I can click on the line itself and move that around. And let me go ahead and put it back on scale and just get that roughly the right size. So if I click on left, now we can see this here. Let's take model opacity, and I'm going to put it on the move. And if I drag straight out like this, remember it's going to snap to the background, so I can hit Control N at that point. I'm going to move the line down and just redraw that out again. So I can look at this in 3D. While I'm in move, I can just kind of get this vantage point here, and I can click and drag on that middle part. You can see how that turned white here. I can click on that. Now if I hold down Shift, I can constrain the movement to that axis. So I'm going to click on left again, and if I don't see the image, I can always click on front and then click back to left at that point. I can turn solo on right here, and that will just make just what I have selected here in the subtool palette visible. So that's a quick way of just isolating whatever you're working on. And you can see the eye is pretty close in the right spot for where I need it. I can put it back on the move transpose tool here and just click and drag and move that back maybe ever so slightly. It's about right there. And I can click off solo and it'll bring back my object. Gonna go back into draw mode. So this is kind of roughly in the right spot. I think I'm gonna want to move the eye over still a little bit more, so I'm gonna click and drag on the transpose tool for move here, and then just kind of position this guy right about here. So now I can rename that just by clicking the rename button, and I'll call this, let's just call it eye. Now I can actually duplicate this object, so I've got an exact copy of it and it's in the subtool palette. Now I need to mirror it across. So ZBrush has a bunch of different deformation tools, but within the deformation tools that they have under deformation, you can go ahead and click mirror, and that's going to mirror that shape over for you. So now I have a head that is able to be push and pulled around, and I have a set of eyes that are going to stay exactly where I've set them to be, and I can start to build some of these features around these eyes. So if I put this on the damn standard brush and actually hold down Alt when I draw with that, that'll raise the surface up. So you can see how I can actually start to build an eyelid that forms around those shapes. And I accidentally selected the eyes by, if you hold down Alt and click on there, I believe the default is you can switch subtools. Instead of going over here into the stack, you can actually hold down Alt and click on the different pieces. So I can click on front. So let's say we want to save these views for future use. You can say save and load, and it'll ask you, would you like to save or load the reference views? Go ahead and say save, and then you'll have to find a location that you're looking for this. And I like to store everything that's image planes related. Try to put that in the image planes folder. And you can just give it a name. Let's go ahead and steal this and put image planes at the end of it. So if I come to another session, if you save this file out, if you say File, Save As for a Z project, you're going to save everything out, but it doesn't store these image planes with your project. I wish it did, but it does not, so you're going to have to use the save and load feature. So when you load your project in for the next time, your image planes won't be there, but make sure you save them out, and you can just go ahead and click this load and load in your image plane files that live separately from the project file. So this should give you a setup to where you can actually use photographs, and you can model off the top of that. Now we've only stored 2 views. You can use the back, right, top, bottom, and a custom 1 and 2, and you will be able to load different images in each one of these. So if you had a series of images from a photo shoot, you could load each one of those images into each one of these slots and use that to model over the top of. Now we didn't really touch on the image size and the Shift H and Shift V, but this will actually take the size of your image in the image plane and either shrink it or grow it. I left it at 100%, and I've showed you a way to make sure that that image loads as you would expect due to your canvas size that you have inside of ZBrush. But it is possible to change the size on this, and it's possible to shift the image left and right and up and down using the Shift H and Shift V. So these are pretty much the options for image plane. The only other gotcha that might get you is if you have a brush that's on and you go to load an image and it looks dark, check RGB. If RGB is turned on and this slider is set on anything other than 100%, that can affect things. If it's on mRGB while you load your image and this is not at 100%, that can affect the look that you have going, and also your material that you have selected while you hit load image might have some effect on what you see on screen as well. So if any of those things happen, just check the RGB or the mRGB and check and make sure the slider's all the way to 100%, and make sure that your shader is actually set to this flat color. Now with those options, you should have pretty good results using this this little plugin that they have in here, and it's quite handy for doing portraits and anytime you need to model and be specific off of a concept or any kind of photo reference that you're trying to model off the top of.